Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metrodon speaking, and today we are back with our favorite professor. Of course, I'm being sarcastic. In the last episode, which if you haven't watched you should totally check it out, link in the description below, the professor told us this.
It's really quite racist, actually. Conquer their sexuality. White supremacy, racist, female power, racist.
White supremacy.
Obviously has sexual connotations. The greatest gay army that's ever been on the planet. The greatest gay army that's ever been on the planet. It's real.
Right, great. Let's see what else she's got to add today. Still haven't heard the word bigot, so that's weird. You know better than that.
Racist. Hello, my name's Peter Meineck. I'm Professor of Classics in the Modern World at New York University, and today we're going to be breaking down
my brain.
Greek and Roman mythology in TV and film. So this is a scene from the movie Aquaman.
I mean, what did you expect? The previous one had the exact same intro. Today we're going to break up Roman and Greek mythology and then Wakanda.
Wakanda is hidden.
So, yeah, here we are. Aquaman, let's go.
Oh, I know the story. It's more than a story. It's real. Kingdoms of Atlantis were one.
Okay, so I haven't watched Aquaman, I'll be honest with you. Not exactly my cup of tea. But yeah, so we're talking about Atlantis. But this could become an interesting piece of conversation. I want to see where he thinks Atlantis originates. Let me guess, Africa.
Racist.
Unlimited energy at a time when the rest of the world still thought the earth was flat.
Okay. I have a dedicated video to debunk the idea that people thought that the earth was flat back in the day. Here it is. They have mechs! Really? I'm gonna watch this movie.
There is no other Greek myth that perhaps has seized the imagination more than the story of Atlantis, where people are actually still physically looking for the place. This movie does a beautiful visual job, actually, of showing us Atlantis. But the reality of Atlantis, it only exists in one place, and that is actually in the dialogues of the philosopher Plato from about 360 BCE, where he's basically having three of Socrates' friends talking about the ideal city to live in, this highly technological superstate that had a great navy. And in Plato's story, it attacks Athens, and it's Athens that actually defeats Atlantis. And then Poseidon is made angry, and he actually does destroy Atlantis, and it kind of falls beneath the sea. And everyone's been looking for it ever since. But clearly, it's a metaphorical story. But it does draw...
Clearly. Is it connected to sexuality? Is it a way to say that people need to... Yeah.
It does draw, I think, on some real things that were happening in antiquity, referencing the Phoenicians, who were great sea traders. It also might mention some of the North African peoples who were also trading and had large navies. I think you've got to see Athens.
Hold on a minute. Let me say something to that. I do have to agree that Plato's Atlantis undoubtedly originated as an allegorical place, an example of the perfect society. But what he said should probably be limited to this consideration. Attempting to quote Africa out of context are now blatantly evident, particularly after what we have seen in the previous video.
A lot of what we call Greek mythology are heavily influenced by stories from Africa via Egypt and Kush. I don't think there would be Greek and Roman mythology without these ancient African stories.
And the attempt to link an hypothetical inspiration for Atlantis to some, as he said, North African people with a large fleet, evidently he's referring to Carthage, I imagine, since he said Phoenician colonies, is nonsensical. If we really must look for real elements that partly inspired the myth of Atlantis, specifically its naval and mercantile power, and its sudden destruction at the hands of the sea god Poseidon, we can reasonably find them in the Cretan thalassocracy and Minoan civilization, not destroyed, but certainly devastated by the eruption of the volcano on the island of Thera, today Santorini, and subsequent tsunami. But please do continue.
And Greece in particular as being in the center of the Mediterranean, and a good 50% of the Mediterranean coastline is the coastline of Africa. So
as he already said in the previous video, but he really likes this statement, which I mean is true.
I actually think most Greek mythology connects the Greeks both with Africa and also with Mesopotamia. But
the problem that I have with this, as I have already mentioned in the previous iteration of this series, now it's going to turn it into a Netflix original, is the fact that even though it's true that there was absolutely a connection between Northern Africa, say for example Egypt and Carthage, with the rest of the Mediterranean basin, because he mentioned that while he was talking about the connection between ancient Roman and Greek mythology and Africa, because he was talking about the kingdom of Kush, then that's where we're going to have a problem, because even the Phoenicians, we know, are a Levantine people. But let's continue.
I certainly don't think that a place called Atlantis ever actually exists in reality. But it's a great example of how myths work, right? You tell a great story and people will actually believe it.
I wonder if he's projecting his own lessons there. Cheap shot.
This scene is from the movie Troy. The depiction of fighting and warfare in this movie was kind of very unsatisfying. You seem to have two mass armies fighting each other, thousands of men on each side. Then you have these guys in chariots. So
what's the problem with that?
Why is this not a chariot war? If I had 20 chariots or 30 chariots, I would use them to kind of run down the infantry, which is what chariots are used for. But the chariots are used rather like kind of taxi services. They're like Ubers. They deliver the aristocrats to the battlefield, and then counterintuitively, they get out of the chariots.
That is not counterintuitive at all. I'll allow him to finish, and then I'll see.
And then they have these one-on-one battles. There's really nowhere in Greece you can have a good chariot battle. You need a huge plain for that. What we think we get in the Iliad is a memory of ancient chariot warfare that comes from Africa or from Anatolia. But chariots were regarded as high status, so chariots get put in there. This
complete, absolute, utter nonsense. First problem, in fact, in the Iliad, Homer describes exactly something like this. So why would the representation of Troy be unsatisfactory is beyond me. He also says that the chariot in the Iliad are a reminiscence of their archaic use in other contexts, and of course he has to come with the idea of either Anatolia or Africa.
Ancient chariot warfare that comes from Africa.
We are full of representation of charioteers in the Mycenaean context, which attest to the usage of war chariots in Bronze Age Greece.
Or from Anatolia.
The Anatolian territory, in which the use of the war chariot develops masterfully, see for example the famous Hittite charioteers, is rich in mountains and impervious areas as much as Greece, which makes this statement,
there's really nowhere in Greece you can have a good chariot battle. You need a huge plain for that.
Completely nonsensical. Of course this made the passage points of armies and great pitched battles often obligatory, but certainly did not make the use of war chariots impossible, as he is stating.
And then, counterintuitively, they get out of the chariots.
Last but not least, the usage of a chariot to lead the leader onto the field and then, when needed, extract him from the fray, interspersed with fighting on foot, is absolutely plausible and realistic, especially among aristocratic cultures, such as for example the Mycenaean one, and is punctually described in a context distant in space and time, but culturally analogous by Caesar, when he faces charioteers. We read, in chariot fightings the Britons begin by driving all over the field, hurling javelins, and generally the terror inspired by the horses and the noise of the wheels are sufficient to throw their opponent's ranks into disorder. Then, after making their way between the squadrons of their own cavalry, they jump down from the chariots and engage on foot.
Counterintuitively, they get out of the chariots and then they have these one-on-one battles.
Let me read that again. They jump down from the chariot and engage on foot. In the meantime, the charioteers retired a short distance from the battle and placed the chariots in such a position that their masters, if hard-pressed by numbers, have an easy means of retreat to their own lines. Gallic War 433. Professor.
Deeply problematical. This next clip is a scene from the TV show Xena. Yeah, I have no idea what that was, but it was fantastic. The one thing that always was interesting about Xena is the way that she does this ululation. She goes whenever she kind of goes into battle. But actually, the women's ululation was a kind of sound of female power in Greek antiquity.
Before talking about female power, is this man even aware of how the Greeks considered women and how much looked down in ancient Greek society females were? Moreover, does he even know what an actual Amazon of the myths looked like? It must be clarified that we are faced with two different figures. If the women of the Sarmatian populations, who were actually accustomed to fighting on horseback with swords and bow, may have most probably inspired the myth, the Amazons of Greek mythology should be understood as monsters, in which case Xena indeed wouldn't be a good representation of an Amazon in the way the Greeks imagined them. Exactly like the Cyclops, the Amazons of myth always live outside the boundaries of the known. Exactly like the Cyclops, whom, with their cannibalism, their brutality and their rejection of the rules of hospitality, are an antithetical model to civilization. In the same way, the Amazons as women warriors, from the perspective of the Greeks, allegorically represent, in the classical world, a sort of overturning of the established order between the sexes. But as a further piece of trivia, if you will, and interesting information, I also want to add this. We have no evidence of female warriors proper in Thrace, for example, or among the Celts. For the latter, we can rather speak of some figures of female leaders, such as, for example, Boudica, who were peculiar figures for which we do not have certainty of circumstances. It is true, however, that we have evidence of female warriors among the steppe populations, specifically, as mentioned, the Sarmatians.
This next scene is from the movie Immortals. That was very strange, actually, and I have lots of feelings about it. Clearly, it's supposed to be Theseus and the Minotaur. The Minotaur, of course, was the mythical offspring, half human and half bull, of Crete. Theseus is dispatched from Athens to destroy the Minotaur because the Athenians have been regularly sending their young to be fed to the Minotaur in the famous Cretan labyrinth. That looked like it was a human figure wearing some kind of Minotaur headdress. I was very excited to meet the Minotaur when I heard it snorting.
I gotta agree with him on this one.
But then I was very disappointed when I actually met the Minotaur.
If you appreciate my content so far and wish to help ensure my ability to continue to tell it how it is, regardless of any possible backlash, please support this channel on Patreon. Any support helps me and my team of academics keep the channel strong and gives us the means to fight back against the political rewriting of history. Stand with us, form the wall, defend the truth.
So this bow that he reveals from this rock is not attested in the Theseus myth. There is a story that Theseus, who grows up in Troezen and doesn't know his identity, does find his father's sword, which is embalmed in a rock. So maybe that's where the screenwriter is getting that idea. But Theseus is not traditionally associated with a bow. Hercules is associated with a bow. So I wonder if they're kind of conflating the two here, because the bow of Heracles is what has these magic arrows that never miss. The bow is a really interesting instrument in Greek mythology. Certainly in the classical period, fighting with a bow was considered as dirty fighting, like a sniper. You hide behind a rock, you pop out, you fire your arrow, and it was considered ignoble. Weapons in mythology always have great power. Most of these stories probably come up from the Bronze Age, what's called the kind of hero age, the age of aristocratic warriors. If you had enough money and wealth that you could afford bronze weapons, and you went against some guy with a pitchfork, you're going to win, right? Because you've got a bronze weapon or you've got bronze armor. Guy you're fighting has just got a wooden club. So the weapon always has great talismanic power. Even today, if you talk to any warrior, you talk to any modern soldier, they sleep with it, they clean it. It's absolutely everything. This next.
Okay, yeah, I partially agree with this in the sense that I think the only thing I could do, because what he's saying makes sense, there is one thing I'd like to add when it comes to weapons, because he did make a sort of connection between the difference of bronze weapons as opposed to wooden weapons. I think there is a way to phrase it that makes more sense in period. In other words, the idea that a powerful or magical weapon of the myth originates from the quality of bronze weapons compared to those equipped with clubs or wooden weapons, as I say, it's not far-fetched, but in my opinion, and again, I'm not necessarily correcting him here, but just sharing my opinion, a better example in period would be the different quality of copper-based alloys of the time, together with a discipline, that of metalworking, which in Europe shows a very uneven development. So that could favor the idea of divine or magical weapons that evidently rested on those made with more resistance and better crafted alloys. So basically a bronze versus better bronze rather than wood versus bronze. But that was just a little extract for fun.
Scene is from the movie Jason and the Argonauts. The Jason and the Argonauts myth. The movie does a pretty good job, actually, of sticking to that. It changes the order of some of it. The story tells us that the king of Colchis has some of these teeth from the serpent or the dragon, depending on which version of the myth that you read, rivulets to come out and irrigate your land. And so that's where we think the story of the Hydra comes from. Percy Jackson's Sea of Monsters. So the Percy Jackson books and movies, they're very successful in their own right because they kind of transpose Greek mythic material onto kids' stories and stories about their anxieties about their identity and their parents and their behavior and their rites of passage. If I look at them as
Not sure about this, like he keeps throwing the word identity. Now, as I have discussed in one of the comments of the previous video, it's not that the word identity is a cuss word. I mean, of course, it can be used in contexts that are not necessarily a matter of modern ideologies, but I am still a little bit confused as to why he spams it. Like, he seems to really like using the word identity into his presentations, and remembering that he did say this.
I was so shocked to see people on January the 6th attacking the Capitol, dressing up as Spartans and running around. And, you know, should think about, right, is that this was perhaps the greatest gay army that's ever been on the planet. The greatest gay army that's ever been on the planet.
Within that context, I can't help but thinking, is he trying to say something or not? It does become a little confusing for me as to try to really understand if there is a specific reason why he's bringing up this in connection to ancient mythology or not. Little difficult because, I mean, I don't trust the guy. Just be honest with you. I don't trust the guy. I think he's just pushing propaganda. That's what he's doing.
Myths are the most relevant things because facts can be debated, interpreted and argued over. But if you tell a story to somebody, you're trying to communicate something important to that person. So when we study ancient myths and the reason they're told, we can actually learn a lot about that culture.
I agree that we could learn a lot about that culture, but that is precisely why we shouldn't change the way that culture thought or understood the world or viewed the world in order for it to fit the strict modern ideas and ideologies that you want to encapsulate them in. And that is what I've seen. I mean, this second episode wasn't as bad as the first one, but one common trope that I see, and that is the reason why I very much disliked his original presentation, and then I kind of came here with a little bit of a negative expectation, if you will, is because of the fact that he's absolutely cherry-picking stuff. He's interpreting things in a way that fits what he's trying to present. He's twisting ideas and putting modern presentism and thoughts into the heads of people in the ancient past. That I honestly find absolutely out of place with the approach that this professor has. As I say, not as much on this second one, but mostly on the first one. But I can still see a connection in the way he thinks. So I imagine that if I were to watch 50 presentations by this professor, at the end of the day, they would all boil down to the same concepts and ideas, which, to me, is quite unfortunate. But still, if you enjoyed this video, noble ones, let me know in the comments below. And if you're not a member of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.